In this recording, we're actually going to be doing Chapter 4, talking about communications, emotions, and criticism. Now, we're actually going to be breaking this up into two videos. You're going to have a Part 1 and a Part 2. The reason for that is because there's a lot of information here. We just want to make sure that you have a chance to take a break during the video. So in the chapter, we're going to be talking about communication, how it flows, the communication process and the steps that it takes in the sending. We'll talk about getting feedback, and then the receiving aspect, how we respond, and then looking at emotions and criticism. Communication is so important in organizations. It's the primary reason why there are problems in organizations. It's because of a lack of or poor communications. And most communication is what it is that we do. In other words, we are actually when we're communicating with somebody else, that is a part of our behavior. Now, in organizations, the structure that we have as far as how things are set up, who reports to whom, things like that, and then also the culture of the organization is going to impact the communications that we have. And there's a lot of current trends as far as organizations are concerned. There's more streamlining, there's more reducing the number of layers, going more towards teams, and all of this is impacting the communications. Now, most organizational structures are, you have your management, your senior management, and everybody, and everything goes up and down for the most part. All right? So in other words, in organizations, you have a lot of verbal communications. In other words, vertical going up and down. You will also have horizontal communications, where you have people in the various areas talking with each other. And then there's also the grapevine. The grapevine is all of the things that people are saying on their own. It's not the formal stuff, but it's the whispering of the various secrets. It's the sharing of information that others may not know. And it's amazing how much information on the grapevine is actually true. Research has shown anywhere between 70 to 80% of the information on the grapevine is accurate. There's a lot of digital technology that's coming into play as far as our communications are concerned. In many ways, it's improved it, and in some ways, it's hurt it. You have a lot of email and texting and things like this that are going on. And there's much more e-commerce. In other words, people are buying things over the internet. People are communicating much more via text and via email. And it really is impacting the communications that we have. Social media is huge as far as communication. Things like Facebook, LinkedIn, and some of the other things that are going on where people are communicating. And this warning here is really key. Do not post something on a social media site that you wouldn't want somebody else to see. There's always a backup someplace. There is always that information held somewhere. And you could put something out there that could hurt you personally. Cloud computing is huge now. That is where you're actually using servers and programs on another computer, not just the one that you have on your desk or on your laptop. You're actually utilizing, via the internet, somebody else's computer in order to get stuff done. Right now, with Canvas, you are doing cloud computing. With digital communications, there's a lot of confidentiality and security issues that go along with it. We have to make sure that we're protecting our personal and our organizational information from outside sources, being stolen, things like this. And the downside of technology is it can be depersonalizing. In other words, people will say things on the internet that they wouldn't say to someone's face. There's also a lot of issues with some of the recent graduates not taking jobs because they couldn't use their own personal phone during the day. So there's some real issues as far as the downside of technology. The communication process is basically circular. When you think about communicating something, you have something that you want to send to somebody else. And what you will do is you will encode that. You will then put that, let's say you're right over here, you put that on a channel of some kind in order to send it to someone else. That's the transmission. So that person over on the other side, the receiver, has to decode that message. And then what they do is they should feed back somehow to the sender. If you don't have that feedback loop, then what you're doing is just a data dump. You do not have communication. When you start thinking about those transmission areas and how you get it across, there are various channels that we use. One of the primary channels is the oral or spoken channel. In other words, face-to-face. You're sitting there across the table from someone and talking. The phone. Sitting in meetings where you might have multiple people sitting around and you have the oral aspect. And then you have presentations, people standing up and giving a presentation and sharing information. In those oral communications, you also have nonverbals. In other words, the stuff around the spoken word. For example, what is your tone of voice, or the pitch that you're using? How loud or how fast are you talking? What kind of pauses or ums and ers are there in there? You also have the nonverbal aspect that relates to the body. This is amazing because so much of what it is that we're saying and the communication that we have, the actual message, is nonverbal between the tone and the pitch and the volume and the pace and the body language. How are you sitting? What kind of facial expressions are you using? What kind of gestures really is impacting the communications? I mean, think about your posture when you're sitting. You have a different message if you are leaning back versus on the edge of your seat. You're sending another message if you're sitting there just doodling and things like this. All of this is impacting the actual message that you're sending to someone. Another key channel is written. You have letters, you have reports, you have emails and texts, bulletin boards, in other words, things that are set up like in break areas. All of this is written communication, another channel that's being used. One of the best things we need to learn to do is combine the various message channels. In other words, if we're telling someone something, we may want to follow up with something written. If we're sending something via computer, making sure that we're getting something back may be important to make sure that there was understanding. There's a lot of barriers to the communication. Now, first of all, you have perception. Things like what words are you choosing? What kind of acronyms are you using? A lot of folks have no idea what some of the acronyms are. Are you giving too much information? What about using the wrong channel? You need to make sure that you're matching the message that you have and what you're trying to get across to the channel. For example, don't try to tell someone that they're being laid off by text message. You better do it face to face. There's noise or distractions that get in the way. Trust and credibility can be a huge barrier. In other words, if there's someone who's telling you something that you don't necessarily trust, or maybe they've lied to you before and they have a lack of credibility, you're not going to believe what it is that they're saying. However, it's completely the opposite also. If there's somebody that you inherently trust, you're going to believe what it is that they're saying. Not listening is another barrier. In other words, there's some people who just have a hard time listening. They're staring off into space. They're just checking out. You also have emotional interference. In other words, the emotions that somebody may be feeling at a particular time may impact and be a barrier to good communication. There's also the idea of filtering. In other words, are we giving the entire message? Gender can get in the way as far as effective communications, language, and then also the culture. And when it talks about gender, believe it or not, men and women are different as far as how they communicate and how their brains are set up. A lot of this is based on biology. Men have a tendency to emphasize status and compete when they're communicating. They tend to more talk about things. They want to solve problems. If you think about it, many times somebody will say, okay, well, I'm having a problem with something, and the man is trying to solve it. Women tend to communicate to create connections and develop relationships. They're more focused in on feelings and emotions, and it's all based on the brain. People are hardwired. Men and women are hardwired differently as far as the brains are concerned. I'm actually going to post a video that talks about that. It's a very funny video, and it's so key, so important, and it just really rings home for a lot of folks. When you start thinking about the nonverbals and facial expressions, there are 6 emotions that are hardwired in the human brain: happiness, surprise, fear, sadness, anger, and disgust. When we experience one of these emotions, it comes out in the face in about 1/5 of a second. We cannot stop it. The outside of the brain, okay, the part that emerged later as far as human development, will put a stop to the experiencing or the showing of those emotions. But those things come out, and we just can't help it. By starting to really tune in to what it is that people are saying and how they're saying it, learning to read the body language and the facial expressions, we can improve our communications. We also want to think about our gestures as far as our nonverbals. I'm sitting here recording this, and I'm talking with my hands as I do it. The hand messages are going to be key as far as our nonverbals. Learning to handle some of those can really help us with our communications. In sending your messages, there are several things that you can do to improve your communications. First of all, learn to develop a rapport and start understanding how to utilize small talk. State the objective up front as far as what it is that you're trying to do with that receiver. You send the message and be as explicit as possible, giving plenty of time, but don't overload. Then check for understanding. Many times, one of the things we need to do is ask people to paraphrase back what they heard and their understanding. And then you might need to get a commitment to follow up. In checking for understanding, that feedback is really key. One of the biggest mistakes that people make is they say, "Okay, do you have any questions?" Well, people are not going to say, "Yeah, I'm stupid and I have questions." What you do is you say, "What questions do you have?" That is much safer, because what it's doing is it's assuming that the person does have questions. So kind of shift the way you do that and say, "Okay, what questions do you have on that?" The thing we have to remember is the meaning is always in the receiver. Just because we think we told them doesn't necessarily mean that they got what we were trying to send. In getting feedback, it's going to be important to learn how to do that and how to do it effectively. Because if we can get feedback effectively as far as receiving it, we will continue to get it. If we don't do it effectively, people are going to shut down. You're never going to hear the truth. So we have to be open to getting good feedback. Be aware of the other person's nonverbals and your own. Don't show that you're defensive or anything like that. Ask questions. And the thing is, paraphrase back some of the things that they're saying. In other words, reflect back the content and feeling of what they're saying to try to make sure that you're understanding exactly where they're coming from. We'll talk next about listening. So what we're going to do is close off this video, and then part 2, we're going to start looking at listening in the rest of the chapter.